Welcome to the MacArthur Memorial Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore the life and legacy of General of the Army Douglas MacArthur and discuss a wide range of military history topics, from the American Civil War to the Korean War. The MacArthur Memorial is in Norfolk, Virginia, the hometown of General MacArthur's mother. But General MacArthur was not born in this city. He was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, at the Little Rock Barracks. Today, that building houses the MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History. And to learn more about MacArthur's birthplace, we are joined today by Stephan McAteer, Museum Supervisor of the MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History. Welcome, sir, and thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't you start us off with a brief sketch of the history of the site prior to MacArthur's birth?
Okay, well, our museum is in the historic Arsenal building. It's the only structure left, the Little Rock Arsenal, a frontier military post built shortly after Arkansas became a state in 1836. Our governor asked the federal government to appropriate money to build a military post here to protect the people living in Arkansas from the threat of Indian attack, the Trail of Tears, relocation of Native Americans from the East Coast to the Indian Territory. All those routes came through Arkansas, and there was the concern that we were in danger. Our building was the first structure that was built as part of that post. It occupied about 36 acres. It was designed for about a company of soldiers to be stationed here to protect our state. And our building initially was a warehouse for all the weapons that were assigned to the state of Arkansas by the Federal Armory. And so the building's original purpose explains its construction, which to me explains why it's still around now 185 years after its initial construction. And it served as a military post during the Civil War. There were various campaigns in the area. And then after the Civil War, our building was converted into officers' quarters for married officers who were stationed here. It was divided into 4 apartments, and that's where we segue into the connection to Arthur MacArthur and his family and Douglas's birth here in our facility.
What do we know about the MacArthur's time in Little Rock prior to Douglas MacArthur's birth?
We don't have a lot of primary source information about that. A lot of it's anecdotal material that we've heard. They were only here for about 18 months. They lived in one of the apartments in this building. We don't know which one. We know that the captain's quarters were the end apartments. And our building is a 3-story building, so the apartments would have been like townhouses. And so we know that his apartment was one of the end apartments. And I say that because there's an infamous postcard that's been around for years that purports to show the birth room or the bedroom where MacArthur was born. And that was done by the old museum that occupied this structure for about 55 years. And even they admitted that that recreation was not historically accurate, and they took it down in 1965. Yet we still get questions of people who ask about what room was MacArthur born in. But we really don't know a lot of information about the family other than Arthur was here with his wife and their 2 sons, and they lived in the apartment here. About the only historical information we have about Arthur came in April of 1880, and that's in relation to a visit to Little Rock by President U.S. Grant. He came to the Arsenal during that visit after his presidency, and then he met Captain MacArthur at that point.
Wow, that's really incredible. So I visited the site a few times, and it is an absolutely fabulous building. And you've got some great exhibits throughout it. And so I guess it always makes me a little sad, though, because we don't know exactly which room MacArthur was born in. But he is born there in the family quarters on January 26, 1880. In his autobiography, MacArthur said that his parents were making plans for him to actually be born in Norfolk, Virginia, at the home of his maternal grandparents, but that he arrived early and kind of threw those plans apart. Other sources say that when he was born, the newspapers here in Norfolk announced that he had been born while away from Norfolk, Virginia. I think that's a very popular story here in Norfolk, but Do we know anything about his birth there in the barracks? Are there any other anecdotes about that day?
Those are the two anecdotes that we hear most often. And, again, the records of that day were not as accurate as we would have liked. There are some military records from the barracks in St. Louis that we were able to access, but they just contain very mundane items. We embrace those two anecdotes that you shared, and when we interpret the history of the building, and part of our mission is commemorating MacArthur's birth here, because we think that's a very important part of our mission in interpreting the building's history, is we share those. And we sometimes jokingly say that MacArthur's connection to our building consists of that first 6 months that he was born here, and then he came back once in his life 72 years later. During that visit, he stayed for 5 hours. So we sometimes say that his connection to our building consists of 6 months and 5 hours separated by 72 years. But, the story that we've heard is that, his mother was packing to go visit her family. It was not uncommon during that time for children to be born at home. The hospitals were not the most safe environments for people. And so, he came early, and we tell our visitors that he was born here despite his mother's best intentions. As historians, we love to play the what if game. And we've often speculated, what if he had not come early? What if he had been born in Virginia? How that might have impacted the history of our facility here as we became a museum to interpret our state's military history, and yet to also embrace the connection that we have with MacArthur, which we think is very significant for our outreach.
I think it's a very significant connection. Now, you said that he spends the first 6 months of his life in Little Rock. So he leaves as a 6-month-old. So he did not have, obviously, memories himself of his time there. And then you said he returns once. He returns on March 23rd, 1952, as he's touring the country following his relief of command by President Truman. What do we know about that visit in 1952? What is his reception like in Little Rock?
Well, the records indicate that he flew into Adams Field here in Little Rock about 10:30 that morning, and he was received by the city council and the mayor. You're correct. A lot of speculation as to why he was touring the country following that little disagreement he had with Truman about the conduct of the war. We cover that topic thanks to a great exhibit that you guys have generously loaned to us that allows us to look at that aspect of MacArthur's career, which I think is overlooked by a lot of historians. During that visit, it did only last 5 hours. He visited Christ Church, where he and his brother Malcolm had been baptized after his birth. And then, importantly for us, he came to visit this building, which at that point had been serving as a military history, not a military history, as a science and history museum from about 1941 until they closed in 1998. But he did come and visit the building. We have the visitor's log where he and his wife Jean and son Arthur signed in. And then he spoke to a crowd of about 10,000 people that were assembled in the park. And park at that time had been named in his honor starting in 1942. So he visited the building where he was born. He visited MacArthur Park. They'd been named after him. And for the first time publicly, he acknowledged that he was born here, acknowledged his connection to the building. And many people in Arkansas will fault him because they don't think that he properly embraced his heritage here. I, on the other hand, say, well, he was 6 months old when he left. He was he was an Army brat. He traveled all over the country. So, no wonder he had no deep childhood memories to Little Rock into Arkansas. And of course, he was famously known to have corrected someone who introduced him as an Arkansan by saying he was a Virginian. We don't fault him for that. But importantly for us, when we were trying to determine a name for our museum, we wanted to embrace MacArthur's birth here. We tell people we are not a museum about MacArthur. You guys are. The only thing that we can do that y'all can't say is that he was born here. And for us, that's significant because his birth here as I tell guests, there have only been five-star generals in our country's history. And by extension, there are only five birthplaces of those generals. And we are one of those. And so because of his fame, because of his stature, because of the way that a large number of the people in this country, this world, revere him, many of them want to visit the birthplace of their hero. And so his birth here, his 6 months here, that one time he came back, and more importantly for us, that embracing of his birth here, that significantly, I think, expands our outreach beyond the Central Arkansas or Arkansas audience. It expands our outreach to national and international visitation. And so I think that's important for us. It's somewhat of a catch-22 because many people, as we found over the last 25 years, many of the people who come here think that the MacArthurs lived in the entire building. They think that this was their summer home. So there's a lot of misapprehension about what his connection to our building is. But for us, we think that his birth here really opened up our audience outreach and the ability to get people to come in and visit our museum and learn more about the history of our building, about the connection to MacArthur. And from all indications, all the press releases that we've seen, the newspaper articles, he was very well received. They estimate about 25,000 people saw him during that time, either here in the park or on the parades. And that would have been roughly half the population of the city. So he was warmly received during that visit. And for us, his acknowledgement of his connection to our building was significant for us today.
And I think even though he always would say, hey, I'm a child of the blue and gray, I've got my mother, the Virginian, I've got, my dad and obviously Wisconsin. I think when he writes about his birth in his autobiography, I think it's very clear that he was very happy to have been born in the Little Rock Barracks. I think just that idea, this historic building, this kind of fort on the frontier for a time, I think it's something that he really liked, even if he didn't ever spend much time in the city or in the state.
And if you look at the transcript of the speech he gave, I mean, it is very emotional. He I think offers sincere appreciation for the care that had been taken to the building. So I think he was acknowledging that he did have a deep personal connection to the building, and I think that dictated a lot of why he wanted to come visit Little Rock on that cross-country tour.
No doubt. I think he was always sentimental about any of the places that he had been, as you said, as that military brat. I think when his mother died, he makes it very clear that, what he kind of misses most is the memories that he had with her, with his dad, with siblings on these outposts all throughout, Midwest and the American West. So we do, you and I, we do have to compete a little bit with Milwaukee, though. Because Milwaukee has quite a MacArthur claim as well. So it's this interesting triangle: Norfolk, Little Rock, Milwaukee here in the States. So
interesting. Of course, he and his father both received the Medal of Honor, and some books credit him with being from Virginia, some credit him with Arkansas, and some even credit him with Wisconsin. And so I think all of that contributes to the uncertainty as to what did he consider himself to be. For us, what I've always found interesting about MacArthur's career is that he is revered by the people that he basically ruled as a conqueror by the Japanese. His firm desire to return to the Philippines convinced President Roosevelt to alter his plans for the conduct of the war. And so he had a deep love for people of the Far East. In Asia, and they returned that love. And as I said, we have last year we had visitation from over 26 foreign countries and 48 of the 50 states. And I think many of them come to our museum because of the MacArthur connection. And that is why when we started our museum as a startup in the late 1990s and opened in 2001, that we decided to embrace his name, and we are the MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History, but we embrace MacArthur in that because he's part of the history and the interpretation of our building.
Yeah, he seems to belong to so many different cities, states, countries, but he was only born in one place, Little
One
Rock,
place.
Arkansas.
Yes, yes. That's
So
one thing no one else can say. He was born here.
now I think you've kind of already started to do this, but can you tell us what happens to the building over time? You said after his birth, at some point, it transitions into kind of a natural history science museum. How do we get to the MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History?
Well, in the 1880s, the Army Department, War Department went through what I call the first phase of base realignment and closures. They decided they had, I think, about 255 small arsenals like ours, and they were spread throughout the country. The end of the conclusion of the Indian Wars in the Southwest, the military decided they wanted to consolidate that many small arsenals into some larger ones that were closer to larger areas for the easy deployment of troops. And so in the late 1880s, Little Rock was notified that the Little Rock Arsenal, at that time called the Little Rock Barracks, would be closed. At that time, our city and then state officials worked together with Congress, and they were able to work out a deal where in 1892, the barracks, the arsenal that was here, was closed, and Little Rock had acquired about 1,000 acres in North Little Rock, right across the Arkansas River from us, that became one of those larger military facilities known as Fort Roots. We say that Arkansas, or the federal government, got 1,000 acres for a new military post, and Little Rock got 36 acres that were part of the Little Rock Arsenal. And so that was actually an act of Congress passed in 1893. And importantly for us, that act of Congress stipulated that the grounds, the 36 acres, the grounds of the military post would forever exclusively be devoted to being a public park. Little Rock had about 50,000 people living here at the time, and we were, MacArthur, the grounds became the city's first park. Initially, it was called Arsenal Park, then it became City Park, and then, as I said earlier, in 1942, it was renamed to MacArthur Park in honor of Douglas's birth here. From 1893 until 1941, 1942, the building really had no one using it. It suffered through a variety of deterioration and decay. And then during the Depression, using WPA labor, the government renovated it, and it became the home of a natural science and history museum that was on these grounds until 1998, and they relocated and left an empty building. And so the city decided at that point, given the city's tie to our early military history, given its ties to General MacArthur, that it would be a great venue for a military history museum. And so that was when I was brought on board in the spring of 1999. Our challenge was, a few months prior to that, Little Rock had been struck by a tornado that came through downtown Little Rock, and it did some damage to our building. It peeled off about half the metal roof and did some water damage inside. And so for our first year and a half, 2 years, we were struggling with that. And we were finally then able in May of 2001 to open as the MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History. And so we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary next year. And so we're very excited about the progress that we made during that time.
Very exciting. So if somebody wants to come visit the museum, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, our mission is to interpret the building. We say that this 185-year-old structure is our biggest and oldest artifact. My office is in the basement of the building, and I often look out through the windows and just imagine what all the history this building has seen, because its origins go all the way back to almost the very beginning of our state. The walls of our building are 3 feet thick, which again I think explains why it's in such good shape today. So we have exhibits that look at the history of the building and how it progressed from an armory, military warehouse, to apartments where officers and their families could live, and it could witness the birth of a military legend, to not being used by anyone, to being a science and history museum to us today. We also embrace the ties to MacArthur, and we have the wonderful exhibit I mentioned earlier that you guys have loaned to us about the controversy between Truman and MacArthur that led to his dismissal during the Korean War. And then we have a small exhibit that looks at his connection to our building. You guys also generously let us show a movie that you guys have done about MacArthur, so we can have something that talks about MacArthur's connection to our building and provides a nice story for people who come to learn about MacArthur. And then we have exhibits that look at various military conflicts. This was a functioning arsenal during the Civil War. There were no battles fought on the grounds, but this was an arsenal. And so there were both Confederate and Federal forces here during that conflict. And so we have an exhibit that looks at various aspects of the Civil War that related to the site here. And then we have exhibits on various military conflicts from World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And then we have traveling exhibits. We're about to open one shortly from Exhibits USA in Kansas City that looks at the war in the Ukraine through the drawings and the art and photographs of children during that conflict. So we like to say that we have a variety of interests. If you like old buildings, you can come see our wonderful facility. If you want to learn more about MacArthur, we have enough to satisfy that interest. And then if you want to learn more about Arkansas military history, we try to use our building and its collection to tell that story as well. And I like to tell people that MacArthur, the tenuous connection that he has to our building, he's a hook, if you will, to get someone through the door. And if they come to see, to witness, and to visit the birthplace of MacArthur, while they're here, they're also going to learn more about the history of the building and how it's changed over time. And they're going to learn more through our exhibits about Arkansas's military history. So, I think we offer a lot for people, whether they love preservation and old buildings, whether they love MacArthur's story, or whether they just love learning about Arkansas military history. You can encompass all of that by one visit to us here at our museum.
I totally agree. I think I've been there a couple times, and it's a fantastic building, really interesting collection. So, I mean, if anybody is able to visit, I would definitely recommend it. And I was just thinking while we were talking that I think the last time I was there, I was actually there with a 6-month-old. So that's so interesting. MacArthur left as a 6-month-old, and the last time I was there, I think I brought a 6-month-old. So great for family visits as well.
I have visited your facility a couple of times, and we enjoy the relationship that we have with y'all. We get questions all the time. We get calls with people all the time about MacArthur, and we always try to refer them to you guys. And I know you guys have worked with us in the past. And we just have a great relationship. And some people would think that we should be competing, but we're not. We complement one another. And I've always appreciated the relationship that we've had with your museum and the support that y'all have given to us. And we're delighted to continue that.
Continue for another 25, 50, 100 years or so, right?
Sounds good to me.
And I feel like there is enough MacArthur history to go around.
There is.
Right. So, well, Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with us about MacArthur's birthplace. Looking forward to working with you more in the future.
All right. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at MacArthurMemorial@norfolk.gov, or find us on X at MacArthur1880, or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.